In Westwood County, money talks. For Charles Remington, it shouted. His empire swallowed the historic Heritage District piece by piece, every black-owned home falling to his development plans through intimidation, corruption, and fraud. Only Martha Johnson's Victorian house remained standing. At 72, they thought she'd be easy to break. One false arrest, one night in jail, one ruined reputation. They didn't count on her son. When Master Sergeant Elijah Johnson, the most decorated, Green Beret alive, received his mother's call from a holding cell, Westwood's power structure didn't just face a grievance. They faced a reckoning. The system that framed an innocent woman never anticipated becoming the target. Now a military strategist who'd outmaneuvered warlords was coming for them, armed with something more dangerous than any weapon, unwavering dedication to justice. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Martha Johnson stood at the entrance of the Westwood Fine Arts Gallery, an elegant brick building with large glass windows that glittered in the afternoon sun. At 72, she carried herself with the quiet dignity that came from a lifetime of standing tall through both joy and hardship. Her silver hair was styled in a neat bob, and she wore her Sunday best, a black dress with matching jacket and a simple pearl necklace her late husband Robert had given her on their 40th anniversary. She glanced down at the embossed invitation in her hand. The gallery was showcasing works by emerging black artists, and her former student, now the town's most promising young painter, had personally invited her to attend. As a retired schoolteacher who had educated 3 generations of the town's children, Martha felt a swell of pride whenever one of her students succeeded. The gallery was already crowded when she entered, filled with the town's elite sipping champagne and discussing art in hushed, important tones. Several people nodded politely to Martha as she made her way through the room. She had taught many of their children, though few bothered to acknowledge that connection in these social settings. "Ms. Johnson," a warm voice called out. James Turner, her former student, waved from across the room. "You made it," Martha smiled, making her way toward him. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, James. Your invitation meant everything to me." James beamed, taking her hands in his. "Your art class was what started all this. I need to show you my centerpiece." As James led Martha through the gallery, neither noticed the tall figure watching them from the corner. Charles Remington stood with a glass of untouched champagne, his steely gaze following the elderly woman. At 65, Remington was the wealthiest man in Westwood County, with slicked-back silver hair and a custom suit that cost more than what most people in town earned in 3 months. "That's her?" asked a man beside him, voice low. Remington nodded slightly. "Martha Johnson lives in one of the last original homes in the Heritage District. Her property is the final piece we need for the development." His companion, the gallery, owner Victor Preston, raised an eyebrow. "And she won't sell?" "Turn down twice what it's worth," Remington replied, his voice tight with irritation. "Says the house has historical significance to the black community. As if that matters more than progress." Preston swirled his champagne. "And you're sure this will work?" "It has to," Remington said. "Once her reputation is destroyed, the community pressure will force her out. Then we'll get that land for half, what I originally offered." Across the room, Martha admired James's centerpiece, a striking canvas depicting the town's history through symbols and vibrant colors. "This is extraordinary, James," she said, eyes shining with pride. "Thank you for believing in me when no one else did," James replied, squeezing her hand. Their moment was interrupted by Preston's voice booming across the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must ask for your attention." The crowd hushed as Preston stepped to the center of the room. "I regret to inform you that we've had a theft. The Callaway diamond necklace, on loan for tonight's charity auction, is missing from its display case." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The Callaway necklace was valued at over $1 million and had been prominently displayed in a glass case. Near the entrance, security has been notified and the police are on their way, Preston continued. I must ask everyone to remain in the gallery until the authorities arrive. Murmurs spread throughout the room as guests exchanged worried glances. Martha frowned, remembering the necklace display she'd passed on her way in. There had been nothing unusual about it then. James leaned closer to Martha. This is strange. That necklace was secure in a locked case with an alarm system. Indeed, Martha said, her eyes narrowing as she noticed Preston whispering to Remington. Something about their demeanor troubled her. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers entered the gallery. Officer Crow was tall and broad-shouldered with a perpetual scowl, while Officer Payne was shorter with close-cropped hair and darting eyes. Both headed straight for Preston, who immediately pointed in Martha's direction. Martha felt a chill as they approached her, their hands resting casually on their holsters. Ma'am, we need to speak with you, Officer Crow said, his voice carrying. Enough for nearby guests to hear. Martha stood straighter, confusion crossing her face. Of course, officer. What's this about? We've received a report that you were seen lingering near the display case before the necklace went missing, Officer Payne said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Martha's eyes widened. That's not true. I only arrived 30 minutes ago and came directly to speak with Mr. Turner here. James stepped forward. Officers, there must be some mistake. Ms. Johnson is a respected member of our community. Sir, please step back, Crow ordered, cutting him off. We need to ask Ms. Johnson some questions. Martha noticed several guests watching now, some with phones raised, recording the interaction. She felt her heart beating faster but kept her expression calm. Officers, the security cameras will show. I did nothing wrong, she said firmly. Preston stepped forward. Unfortunately, our security system experienced a glitch this evening. The cameras were offline for about 20 minutes, right when the theft occurred. Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. This was no coincidence. Ma'am, did you have your handbag? With you all evening? Officer Payne asked, eyeing Martha's small purse. Yes, it hasn't left my side, Martha replied. We'll need to check it, Crow said, reaching for her bag. Martha pulled back slightly. Do you have a warrant, officer? The officer's expression hardened. Ma'am, we're investigating a felony theft. If you refuse to cooperate, we'll have to take you to the station. Martha could see what was happening but couldn't believe it. After 50 years in this town, after teaching hundreds of its children, this was how they would treat her? I've done nothing wrong, she said calmly, but I will not allow you to search my belongings without proper procedure. Crow's jaw tightened. Martha Johnson, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and suspicion of grand theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, in a court of law. As the officer continued reading her rights, Martha noticed a young gallery assistant, Emma Wilson, another former student, watching with wide, horrified eyes from behind a display. The girl looked as if she wanted to say something but kept glancing fearfully at Preston and Remington. Officer Payne pulled Martha's arms behind her back and fastened handcuffs around her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin, but she refused to wince. James protested loudly. This is outrageous. You can't just arrest her without evidence. Sir, step back now or you'll be next, Crow warned, hand moving to his taser. As the officers began leading Martha toward the exit, whispers followed her through the gallery. She heard fragments. Always seemed so nice. You never know about people. What a shame at her age. The stares burned into her back, a mixture of shock, judgment, and pity. Outside, a news van had already arrived, cameras rolling as Martha emerged in handcuffs. The reporter looked almost gleeful at the unexpected story, an elderly woman being arrested at a high society art event. Martha straightened her back as she was led to the police car. Officer Payne roughly guided her head down as she was placed in the back seat. Before the door closed, she turned to both officers, her voice quiet but firm. "You're making the worst mistake of your lives." Neither officer reacted, slamming the door and moving to the front of the vehicle. As they pulled away, Martha looked out the window to see a small crowd gathered, phones raised, capturing her humiliation. Among them stood Emma Wilson, the gallery assistant, looking torn and frightened. Their eyes met briefly before the police car turned the corner. In the rearview mirror, Officer Crow watched Martha's reflection. "You comfortable back there, Grandma?" Martha didn't respond, instead gazing calmly out the window. The officers exchanged glances, unsettled by her composure. Most people would be crying, protesting, or demanding a lawyer by now. As they drove, Martha's mind was clear and focused. This was a setup. That much was obvious. What wasn't yet clear was why, though she had her suspicions. Her house sat on land that developers had been eyeing for years. But why go to such lengths? And how? Had they managed to involve the police so easily? None of that mattered right now. There was only one thing Martha needed to do, and she would wait patiently for her moment. On their arrival at the police station, news crews were already gathering, alerted by someone inside the system. Headlines would soon blare about the elderly art thief caught red-handed. Martha was led through the station, past curious officers and staff who stopped to stare. Online, videos of her arrest were already spreading, accompanied by cruel comments and wild speculation. The community that had respected her for decades was turning against her in real time, her reputation unraveling with each share and retweet. But Martha remained calm, because she knew something no one else in that station knew. Her son was coming. The precinct buzzed with activity as Martha sat alone in the interrogation room. The stark fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the metal table where her cuffed hands rested. 3 hours had passed since her arrest, yet no one had formally questioned her. This was deliberate, a tactic designed to wear her down. Outside the room, Officers Crow and Payne huddled with Sergeant Miller, a heavy-set man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow. "She hasn't said a word since we brought her in," Payne reported. "Just sits there like she's waiting for something." Miller peered through the one-way glass. "Any priors?" "Clean as a whistle," Crow replied. "Which makes this interesting. Why would a 72-year-old pillar of the community suddenly lift $1 million necklace?" Miller grunted. "Desperation makes people do crazy things. Maybe she's got debts we don't know about." The gallery owner was pretty adamant she was the only one near that display when the cameras conveniently went down, Payne added. Miller nodded. "Keep her waiting another hour, then see if she's ready to talk. Judge Whitmore is standing by to deny bail if we need him to." As the officers dispersed, none noticed Detective Carter, a 30-year veteran nearing retirement, watching their conversation with narrowed eyes. He approached the desk sergeant quietly. "That elderly woman you brought in, what's her name again?" he asked casually. "Martha Johnson," the sergeant replied, barely looking up from his paperwork. Detective Carter stiffened visibly. "Martha Johnson from the Heritage District? Robert Johnson's widow?" "Yeah, that's her." "Why?" Carter shook his head slowly. "You boys have no idea what you've just done, do you?" Across town, in the elegant office of Judge Howard Whitmore, a private call was being taken. The judge, a silver-haired man with a perpetual tan and tailored suit, listened intently to the voice on the other end. "The Johnson woman needs to stay locked up at least through the weekend," Charles Remington's voice commanded through the speakerphone. "Long enough for the media to destroy what's left of her reputation." "And if she makes bail?" Whitmore asked. "Swirling bourbon in a crystal tumbler. Set it impossibly high. She's a flight risk due to the value of the stolen item." The judge chuckled. "A 72-year-old schoolteacher is hardly going to flee the country, Charles. Just do your job," Remington snapped. "Remember who financed your last campaign." The call ended abruptly, leaving Whitmore staring at the phone. He downed his bourbon in one gulp and reached for the bottle again. Something about this situation made him uneasy. Back at the station, Martha continued her patient vigil. They had offered her water several times, which she politely declined. Food had been brought and left untouched. Her stillness was beginning to unnerve the officers who periodically checked on her. Finally, the door opened, and Officers Crow and Payne entered with a file folder. "Mrs. Johnson," Crow began, his tone artificially pleasant. "We've been trying to piece together what happened tonight." Martha simply looked at him, her expression neutral. "The gallery owner has provided a statement saying he saw you near the display case right before the theft was discovered." Payne continued, opening the folder to reveal photos of the empty display. "A necklace worth over $1 million is missing. Things will go much easier for you if you just tell us where it is." Martha remained silent, her gaze steady. Crow leaned forward. "Look, at your age with no priors, you could get a reduced sentence if you cooperate. But if we have to tear your house apart looking for that necklace, things get much more complicated." At the mention of her house, a flicker of understanding crossed Martha's face. This had never been about a necklace at all. "I believe I'm entitled to make a phone call," she said, her voice calm and clear, the first words she'd spoken since arriving. The officers exchanged glances. "Who are you planning to call? Your lawyer?" Payne asked with a smirk. "My son," Martha replied simply. Something in her tone made Crow shift uncomfortably. "Fine. One call, then we continue this conversation." They led Martha to a desk with a phone, removing one handcuff to free her right hand. A female officer stood nearby, watching closely. Martha dialed a number from memory and waited. 4,000 miles away in a secure military facility, Master Sergeant Elijah Johnson was reviewing mission parameters with his team when his secure line rang. Few people had this number, and fewer still would use it unless absolutely necessary. "Johnson," he answered, his deep voice echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "Elijah!" Martha's voice came through, steady, but with an undercurrent only a son would recognize. "I need you." The line went silent for 3 heartbeats. "Where?" Elijah asked, his tone shifted to something harder. "Westwood County Police Department. Charges? Theft. And obstruction. It's a setup." Another beat of silence. "I'm coming. Hold the line." In the briefing room, Elijah's team watched as their commander's expression changed. Though his face remained composed, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. The men exchanged glances. They recognized that look. It meant trouble was coming for someone. Elijah spoke briefly to his superior officer, then returned to the phone. "Mom, I'll be there by morning. Don't say anything else to anyone." "I won't," Martha replied. "I love you, son." "Love you too, Mom." As Martha hung up, she noticed the female officer watching her with newfound curiosity. The woman escorted her back to the interrogation room, where Crow and Payne waited impatiently. "Ready to cooperate now?" Crow asked. Martha smiled slightly. "I think we're done talking for today." Payne leaned forward, irritation clear on his face. "Who exactly did you call? Some local attorney who'll be here in the morning with paperwork?" "My son," Martha repeated. "And what's he going to do?" Crow scoffed. "Call the AARP to complain about elder abuse?" Martha didn't respond, her silence more unsettling than any threat could have been. At that moment, Detective Carter knocked and entered the room, shooting a disapproving look at the 2 officers. "I need a moment with Mrs. Johnson," he said firmly. Crow started to protest, but Carter cut him off. "Now, officers." Once they'd left, Carter sat across from Martha, his expression apologetic. "Mrs. Johnson, I served with your husband in Vietnam. Robert was a good man." Martha nodded. "Yes, he was." "And your son," Carter hesitated. "Is Elijah coming?" "Yes." Carter exhaled slowly, running a hand over his thinning hair. "God help us. All." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I know you didn't steal anything." After Carter left, Martha was returned to a holding cell for the night. As she sat on the thin mattress, she heard officers whispering outside. "Who's her son anyway?" asked a young officer. "Elijah Johnson," replied Carter's voice. "Most decorated Green Beret alive. They say he once extracted 6 hostages from a warlord's compound without firing a single shot. The warlord and his men were found tied up the next morning, alive, but so terrified none of them would speak for days." The young officer laughed. "Sounds like movie bullshit." "Laugh all you want," Carter replied grimly. "But I've seen what happens when someone crosses that family. I'm putting in for vacation time tomorrow." At the gallery, now closed and empty, Emma Wilson stood in the darkened main room, her heart racing. She had seen everything: the real thief slipping the necklace into a pocket, the whispered conversation with Preston, the deliberate targeting of Martha Johnson. But speaking up meant losing her job, her scholarship, maybe worse if Remington was involved. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boyfriend. "Did you see the news about that old lady stealing the necklace?" "Crazy." Emma closed her eyes, shame washing over her. She knew the truth, but fear kept her silent. Across town, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Charles Remington received confirmation that Martha Johnson was in custody with no bail hearing until Monday. He smiled, pouring himself a celebratory whiskey. "By Monday, her reputation will be in tatters," he told his assistant. "The Heritage District will finally be ours. Call our media contacts. I want this story everywhere by morning." "Yes, sir," the assistant replied, making notes. "And if she somehow makes bail?" "She won't," Remington said confidently. "Whitmore will see to that." Neither man knew about the storm that was already heading their way. At a private airfield outside Washington, D.C., Elijah Johnson boarded a sleek jet, along with 2 men from his unit: Marcus Taylor, a communications specialist with a genius for extracting digital information, and David Wilson, a former lawyer turned special forces operator who knew how to navigate both legal and physical battlegrounds. "What's the situation?" Marcus asked as they settled into their seats. "My mother has been arrested on false charges," Elijah replied, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Someone is trying to get to her. Or to me." David's expression darkened. "Any idea who's behind it?" "Not yet, but we'll find out." Elijah's gaze was fixed on the horizon as the jet began to taxi. "And they'll wish they'd never heard my mother's name." As the plane lifted into the night sky, Martha Johnson closed her eyes in her cell, a slight smile on her lips. She had raised her son to stand against injustice wherever he found it. Now, those who had wronged her would learn exactly what that meant. Back at the station, Chief Henderson arrived for the night shift briefing, surprised by the unusual activity. "What's this I hear about arresting Martha Johnson?" he demanded. Sergeant Miller explained the situation, emphasizing the gallery owner's testimony and the value of the missing necklace. Henderson frowned. "And Judge Whitmore called personally. About this case? Why would he care about a theft charge?" "Remington's involved somehow," Detective Carter interjected from the doorway. "And they've poked a hornet's nest. Elijah Johnson is coming to town." The chief's face paled. "Martha Johnson is Elijah Johnson's mother, the Green Beret." Carter nodded grimly. Henderson ran a hand over his face. "Get me everything on this case. Witness statements, evidence, all of it. Now." As the station erupted into frantic activity, Martha lay on her cell cot, serene amidst the storm building around her. Outside, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. Her son was coming. Home dawn broke over Westwood County with streaks of gold and crimson, cutting through the morning sky. Martha Johnson had slept little, the hard cot in her cell offering minimal comfort to her aging bones. Yet her eyes remained clear, and her resolve unshaken as she awaited her son's arrival. Word had spread quickly through the precinct overnight. The whispers started with Detective Carter, then traveled from officer to officer like electricity through a wire. By morning shift change, even the newest rookie had heard the name. Elijah Johnson. Officer Reed, a young patrolman barely 2 years on the force, leaned against the break room counter as he poured his coffee. "So what's the big deal about this Johnson guy anyway?" he asked Officer Miller, who was grabbing a donut from the box, on the table. Miller glanced around before lowering his voice. "You ever hear about that hostage situation in North Africa 3 years ago? American aid workers taken by terrorists?" Reed nodded. "Sure, they were rescued in some covert op. Big news for a week." That was him. Johnson led that mission. 6 hostages extracted without a single American casualty. What they didn't tell the public was how they found all 12 terrorists the next morning. Dead? Miller shook his head. Alive. But changed. One guy, their leader, was a notorious warlord known for beheading prisoners on camera. They found him curled up in a corner, whispering the same sentence over and over. When they brought in a translator, turns out he was saying, "The ghost. Promised he'd come back for me." Reed scoffed. "Sounds like BS." "Maybe," Miller shrugged. "But I know a guy who served with Johnson. Says he's the kind of man who can walk into a room and make hardened killers reconsider their life choices without saying a word. And now, he's coming here because we arrested his mother." The conversation was cut short as Chief Henderson burst into the break room, his face tight with stress. "I want everyone in the briefing room now." Across town, Charles Remington's morning began with his usual routine. A 5-mile run on his treadmill overlooking the city, followed by a protein shake prepared by his personal chef. As he scrolled through emails on his tablet, a news alert caught his attention. Local teacher arrested in high-value art theft. Remington smiled, tapping the link to read the full story. The article painted Martha Johnson as a once-respected community member who had perhaps turned to crime in her elder years. Quotes from anonymous sources suggested financial troubles might have motivated the shocking theft. His media contacts had done their job well. His satisfaction was interrupted by a call from Judge Whitmore. "Have you seen the news?" Remington asked by way of greeting. "I have," Whitmore replied, his voice unexpectedly tense. "But there's something you need to know. The Johnson woman's son is—" "I don't care about her family," Remington cut him off. "Just make sure she stays locked up through the weekend. By Monday, public opinion will have turned so far against her that no one will question when she's forced to sell her property." "You don't understand," Whitmore insisted. "Her son is Elijah Johnson, the Green Beret. He's—" "A soldier?" Remington laughed. "What's he going to do, storm the police station? This isn't Afghanistan, Howard. The law is on our side." "The law is what we've made it," Whitmore said quietly. "And I'm not sure it will protect us from a man like Johnson." At Westwood County Airport, a private jet touched down smoothly on the runway. The door opened, and 3 men descended the steps. Elijah Johnson led the way, his powerful frame moving with the fluid economy of a predator. At 45, his close-cropped hair showed touches of gray at the temples, and fine lines surrounded his eyes, evidence of years spent squinting into desert suns and jungle darkness. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray button-down, shirt, and a black leather jacket. But nothing could disguise the military bearing in his posture. Behind him came Marcus Taylor, whose boyish face belied both his 36 years and his expertise in electronic warfare. His fingers constantly twitched as if itching to be at a keyboard. Last came David Wilson, the legal mind of their team, his observant eyes already scanning the airport as if mapping potential threats and escape routes. A black SUV waited on the tarmac. The driver, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, stepped forward as they approached. "Master Sergeant Johnson, I'm Jeff Parker. I served with your father in '82. Elijah nodded, shaking the man's hand. "Thanks for meeting us. Least I could do. Your father helped my family when we needed it most." Parker's expression darkened. "What they're doing to your mother, it isn't right." "No," Elijah agreed, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. "It isn't." As they drove into town, Parker filled them in on the local gossip surrounding Martha's arrest. By now, most of Westwood knew about the stolen necklace and Martha's alleged involvement. Opinion was divided. Those who knew Martha personally couldn't believe the accusations, while others were all too ready to accept that someone's character could change with age. "There's more," Parker said, glancing at Elijah in the rearview mirror. "That land your mother's house sits on, Remington Properties has been buying up the whole area. Your mother's place is the last holdout." "Charles Remington," Elijah said, the name like a statement rather than a question. "Richest man in the county. Owns half the businesses and most of the politicians." Marcus was already typing on his laptop. "Remington Properties. Extensive real estate holdings throughout the state. Multiple allegations of unethical business practices, but no convictions. Significant political donations to several judges and state representatives, including—" He looked up. "Judge Howard Whitmore, who's handling your mother's case." David leaned forward. "That's our connection. If Remington wants your mother's property and she won't sell, frame her for theft, destroy her reputation, force her out," Elijah concluded, his expression unchanged, but his eyes hardening. "And they're using the whole system to do it." The SUV pulled up in front of the Westwood County Police Department, a boxy brick building with the county seal displayed prominently above the entrance. News vans were parked outside, reporters doing morning updates on the shocking art heist that had captivated local viewers. "Want me to wait?" Parker asked. "No need," Elijah replied. "This might take a while." As the three men exited the vehicle, a reporter spotted them and hurried over, camera operator in tow. "Excuse me, sir. Are you here about the Martha Johnson case? Do you have a comment on—" Elijah walked past without acknowledging her, Marcus and David flanking him as they approached the station entrance. Their synchronized movements and alert postures made several officers outside straighten instinctively, recognizing fellow warriors even in civilian clothes. Inside, the station fell eerily quiet as Elijah entered. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes turned to watch the newcomers. Someone whispered, "That's him," and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Elijah approached the front desk, where a young officer sat frozen like a deer in headlights. "I'm here to see Martha Johnson," he said, his voice calm and measured. The officer swallowed visibly. "Sir, visiting hours don't start until—" "I'm not a visitor," Elijah interrupted softly. "I'm her son." Before the officer could respond, Officer Crow emerged from a side hallway, his face set in its usual scowl. "Can I help you?" he asked, deliberately casual but unable to hide the tension in his shoulders. Elijah turned, his gaze locking onto Crow like a targeting system. "You arrested my mother last night. I'd like to see her." Crow's attempt at a dismissive smirk failed to fully form on his face. "She's being processed. She's busy." Elijah tilted his head slightly, studying the officer with the same careful assessment he might give an unexploded mine. The gesture, small as it was, made Crow take an involuntary step backward. The standoff was interrupted by Chief Henderson, who emerged from his office looking harried. "Mr. Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Chief Henderson. Why don't we talk in my office?" From the hallway leading to the cells, Martha heard her son's voice. A small smile crossed her face as she sat up straighter on the bench, hands folded in her lap, waiting. In Henderson's office, the chief gestured for Elijah to sit, while Marcus and David remained standing by the door. "I understand your concern, Mr. Johnson, but I assure you, your mother is being treated according to protocol." "Is that why she was arrested publicly, in front of news cameras that were conveniently present?" Elijah asked, his tone conversational. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "That wasn't planned. The media monitors police frequencies. And is it protocol to hold a 72-year-old woman with no criminal record overnight without bail for allegedly stealing a necklace she never touched?" "The value of the item makes it a serious offense," Henderson began, but his argument sounded weak even to his own ears. "Chief," Elijah said quietly. "We both know what's happening here. The question is whether you're a willing participant or just a man following orders without asking questions." Henderson's face flushed. "I don't appreciate what you're implying." And, "I don't appreciate my mother being used as a pawn in a real estate scheme," Elijah countered, his voice still calm. "So let's stop pretending. Remington wants my mother's property. She won't sell. Now she's suddenly a criminal." The chief stared at him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "It's not that simple." "It never is," Elijah agreed. "But it starts with you doing the right thing. I want to see my mother. Now." 10 minutes later, Martha looked up as the cell door opened. Elijah stood in the doorway, his imposing frame somehow making the officers behind him look smaller by comparison. For a brief moment, the hardened soldier's expression softened into that of a son seeing his beloved mother in distress. "Mom," he said simply. Martha rose with dignity, embracing him as he stepped forward. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "Always," he replied, then turned to the officers. "Remove her handcuffs." Officer Payne hesitated. "We can't." "Now," Elijah said, the single word carrying such quiet authority that Payne found himself complying before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. As the cuffs came off, Martha rubbed her wrists and smiled at her son. "They think I stole a necklace from the gallery." "I know," Elijah replied, "but we're going to fix this." Outside the cell, David was already on his phone, calling in favors from former colleagues in the legal world. Marcus had somehow gained access to a computer terminal and was quietly working his way through layers of digital security. Chief Henderson watched them with growing unease, especially when he saw Detective Carter speaking intently with Elijah, occasionally pointing toward different officers and making notes. The precinct's atmosphere had shifted. What had been a routine arrest, even a moment of amusement for some of the more cynical officers, now felt like the opening moves of a battle they hadn't signed up for. Across town, Judge Whitmore was growing increasingly agitated as his calls to the police station went unanswered. Finally, his clerk brought him a message. Martha Johnson would be appearing for a bail hearing within the hour, far ahead of the Monday schedule he'd established. "Who authorized this?" he demanded. "Chief Henderson, sir. He said new information has come to light." Whitmore slammed his fist on the desk. "Get me Remington. Now." At the gallery, Emma Wilson arrived for her morning shift to find the place swarming with private security guards. Victor Preston paced nervously by the entrance, checking his watch every few seconds. "Mr. Preston?" she asked hesitantly. "Is everything okay?" "Fine," he snapped. "Just additional security after last night's incident. The exhibition is closed today. Go home." As Emma turned to leave, a tall man in a suit intercepted her at the door. "Miss Wilson?" he asked quietly. "I'm David Wilson. No relation. I work with Elijah Johnson. I believe you saw something last night." Emma froze, fear evident in her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about." David handed her a card. "When you're ready to tell the truth, call this number. We can protect you from Remington." Emma stared at the card, then at David. "How did you know?" "We know a lot more than they think we do," David replied. "The question is whether you'll do the right thing before an innocent woman's life is destroyed." As David walked away, Emma slipped the card into her pocket, her heart racing. Meanwhile, at his penthouse, Remington was furious. "What do you mean she's getting a bail hearing today? You promised she'd be locked up all weekend." Judge Whitmore sounded equally agitated. "Her son is Elijah Johnson, the Green Beret, the most decorated. I don't care if he's Captain America," Remington shouted. "We had an agreement. You deny bail, period." "It's not that simple anymore," Whitmore argued. "Johnson has brought in heavy hitters. There's a former JAG lawyer with him who's friends with the state attorney general. They're already looking into the coincidence of news cameras being at the gallery during the arrest." "Then stick to the plan and deny bail," Remington insisted. "By the time they can appeal, the damage to her reputation will be done." And what about my reputation? Whitmore countered. My career? If this goes sideways, your career exists because I funded it, Remington reminded him coldly. Remember that before you grow a conscience. The line went dead, leaving Whitmore staring at the phone. After a moment, he reached for the bourbon in his desk drawer, no longer caring that it was barely 10 a.m. Back at the station, Martha sat with Elijah in an interview room, now being treated as a visitor area rather than an interrogation space. She recounted everything that had happened at the gallery. The necklace was there when I arrived, she explained. I noticed it because it was beautiful. Diamonds set in platinum with sapphires. The display case was closed and locked. Who else was near it? Elijah asked. Several people throughout the evening. Victor Preston was showing it to guests. There was a young security guard nearby. Emma Wilson, one of my former students, was helping serve champagne in that area. And when did they claim it went missing? About 40 minutes after I arrived. Preston made the announcement, and within minutes those officers were there coming straight for me. Elijah nodded, making mental notes. And Emma? How did she react? She looked frightened, Martha recalled. Not surprised, frightened, like she knew something. Before Elijah could respond, Marcus appeared at the door. We need to move now, he said urgently. Just intercepted a call from Remington to someone at the courthouse. They're trying to get your mother transferred to state custody before the bail hearing. Elijah stood. On what grounds? Flight risk due to the value of the stolen item. It's bogus, but they're pushing it through right now. Elijah's expression didn't change, but Martha recognized the dangerous stillness that came over him, the same look his father used to get when protecting his family. David? Elijah asked. Already on it, Marcus replied. He's at the courthouse filing emergency motions, but we need to get your mother there now, before the transfer order arrives. Chief Henderson appeared in the doorway, looking torn. Johnson, I just received orders to prepare your mother for transfer to state custody. Those orders are illegal, and you know it, Elijah replied calmly. Henderson hesitated, then lowered his voice. There's a back exit, no cameras. My personal vehicle is parked there. Keys are in the visor. Elijah studied the chief for a moment, then nodded once in acknowledgement. Thank you. I never said that, Henderson replied, then walked away. Martha looked at her son. Elijah, if we run... We're not running, Mom, he assured her. We're just changing the battlefield to one they don't control. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and onlookers when Martha Johnson arrived, flanked by her son and his team. The sight of the dignified elderly woman walking freely beside the imposing figure of Elijah Johnson sent whispers rippling through the crowd. Mrs. Johnson, is it true you've been released? A reporter called out. No charges have been dropped, David answered smoothly, guiding them through the throng. We're here for a properly scheduled bail hearing, as is Mrs. Johnson's right. Inside, the courthouse was a flurry of activity. Judge Whitmore had been unexpectedly detained according to his clerk, and Judge Sandra Reynolds would be presiding instead. Remington's lawyers were huddled in a corner, frantically making calls and shuffling papers. They didn't expect us to move so quickly, Marcus murmured to Elijah. They're scrambling. David nodded in agreement. Reynolds is fair. By the book. No connections to Remington that I could find. As they took their seats in the courtroom, Martha noticed Officer Crow and Payne enter, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Behind them came Victor Preston, the gallery owner, who deliberately avoided meeting Martha's eyes. The witness who claimed to see me near the display, Martha whispered to Elijah. Her son nodded slightly, his gaze fixed on Preston, with the calm assessment of a sniper choosing his moment. Judge Reynolds entered, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I understand we have an unusual situation here, she began, reviewing the file before her. Mrs. Johnson was arrested last night, but no formal charges have been filed beyond the initial booking. Yet there was an attempt to transfer her to state custody as a flight risk. Would the prosecution care to explain? The assistant district attorney, a young man named Thomas Fuller, stood nervously. Your Honor, given the value of the stolen item, we believe the prosecution has not provided a shred of evidence connecting my client to any theft, David interrupted, rising to his feet. No stolen property was found in her possession. No witnesses have provided sworn statements. The security cameras were conveniently non-functional. This arrest was made purely on the verbal accusation of the gallery owner, who has financial ties to developers interested in Mrs. Johnson's property. Fuller looked taken aback. Your Honor, this is the first I'm hearing of any connection to real estate matters. Judge Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Is the prosecution not prepared with basic facts about this case? There was pressure to expedite certain procedures, Fuller admitted, looking increasingly uncomfortable. From whom? The judge pressed. Fuller hesitated, glancing toward the gallery where Remington's lawyers sat. Your Honor, David continued, we have reason to believe this entire case is a fabrication designed to pressure my client into selling her home. We've filed a motion to dismiss all charges and are preparing a civil suit for false arrest and defamation. Judge Reynolds studied the papers before her, then looked directly at Martha. Mrs. Johnson, you have been a member of this community for over 50 years. You have no criminal record. The prosecution has presented no compelling evidence to justify your continued detention, let alone transfer to state custody. She turned to Fuller. Bail is set at $1,000, which I understand has already been posted. Mrs. Johnson is free to go pending further investigation. She banged her gavel once, then added, And Mr. Fuller, I suggest you carefully review who's been directing your office's priorities in this matter. This court will not be used as a tool for real estate disputes. As they exited the courtroom, Elijah noticed Victor Preston trying to slip away unnoticed. With a slight nod to Marcus, who immediately moved to block the exit, Elijah approached the gallery owner. Mr. Preston, he said quietly, we need to talk. Preston's face went pale. I have nothing to say to you. That's unfortunate, Elijah replied, because I have many questions, like why security cameras failed only during the exact window when this theft allegedly occurred, or why news crews were prepositioned for my mother's arrest, or perhaps most importantly, he leaned slightly closer, where the Callaway necklace is currently hidden. Preston swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Elijah countered. And I think you know what happens next if you continue to participate in this fraud. My team has already accessed your banking records. That $50,000 deposit you received last night? Not very subtle. The gallery owner's eyes widened in shock. You can't. That's illegal. So is framing an innocent woman, Elijah replied, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made Preston step back involuntarily. I'm giving you one chance to make this right. Tell the truth about what happened, or the next conversation we have won't be nearly as pleasant. Before Preston could respond, one of Remington's lawyers appeared at his side. Mr. Preston isn't making any statements, and you should be careful about making accusations without proof. Elijah smiled slightly. Proof is exactly what we're gathering, counselor. And there's always someone willing to talk first to save themselves. Will it be your client? Or perhaps Judge Whitmore? Officers Crow and Payne are already reconsidering their positions. The lawyer maintained his professional demeanor, but a flicker of concern crossed his face. Any evidence obtained illegally won't be admissible. I'm not concerned about court admissibility, Elijah replied. I'm concerned about justice for my mother. One way or another, that's going to happen. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around them, shouting questions. David stepped forward to make a brief statement. Mrs. Johnson has been released pending further investigation. We are fully confident that all charges will be dropped once the truth emerges about this unfortunate misunderstanding. Martha walked, with her head held high, ignoring the cameras and questions. At the bottom of the steps, she was surprised to see a small group of her former students gathered with supportive signs. James Turner, the artist from the gallery, stepped forward and hugged her. "We know you didn't do anything wrong, Ms. Johnson," he said firmly. "And we're not going to let them destroy your reputation." Martha smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you, James. That means more than you know." As they drove to Martha's home, Elijah laid out their next steps. Marcus is digging into Remington's finances and communications. David is preparing legal counterattacks on multiple fronts. I've got people looking for the gallery assistant, Emma Wilson. She's the key witness. "And what about the necklace?" Martha asked. "If I had to guess, it never left the gallery," Elijah replied. "It's probably hidden somewhere on the premises, ready to be discovered once you've been thoroughly discredited." When they arrived at Martha's house, a beautiful Victorian in the heart of the Heritage District, they found a small crowd of reporters had beaten them there. Elijah helped his mother through the throng, ignoring questions as they made their way to the front door. Inside, Martha sighed with relief to be home. The house was filled with memories, photos of her late husband, Elijah's childhood achievements, mementos from decades of teaching. This was more than property. It was her family's legacy. "This is what they're after?" Marcus asked, looking around appreciatively at the beautiful old home. "Not just this house," Martha explained. "The entire Heritage District. These homes were built by the first black professionals in Westwood. Doctors, lawyers, teachers who weren't allowed to live in other neighborhoods. There's history here that can't be replaced by luxury condos." Elijah nodded, understanding completely why his mother had refused to sell, regardless of the price offered. Their planning session was interrupted by a call from David, who had remained at the courthouse. "You need to see this," he said when Elijah answered. "Judge Whitmore just arrived and he looks like he's about to crack. And Remington's lawyers are in full damage control mode. Keep eyes on them," Elijah instructed. "We're setting up here." No sooner had he hung up than Martha's phone rang. It was Emma Wilson. "Ms. Johnson," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you." "About what really happened at the gallery?" "Of course, Emma," Martha replied gently. "Where are you?" "At the coffee shop on Main Street." "I'm scared, Ms. Johnson. They've been watching my apartment." Elijah took the phone. "Emma, this is Elijah Johnson, Martha's son. Stay where you are. I'm sending someone to bring you here safely." After dispatching Marcus to retrieve Emma, Elijah turned to his mother. "This is moving faster than I expected. Remington's operation is unraveling." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Fear does that. These men are used to intimidating ordinary people who can't fight back. They don't know what to do when someone stands up to them." Meanwhile, across town, Charles Remington was in a rage, pacing his penthouse as his lawyers delivered the bad news. How could she get bail? Whitmore was supposed to handle this. "Whitmore never showed up at the courthouse," his head lawyer explained. "Reynolds took the case instead, and Johnson's team was prepared. They had motions filed, evidence of Preston's payment, everything." "What evidence? There can't be evidence of something that didn't happen legally." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I think we need to consider cutting our losses. If this turns into a full investigation—" "I'm not giving up that land," Remington snapped. "The Heritage District project is worth hundreds of millions. One old woman and her soldier boy aren't going to stop me." "Sir, with respect," another lawyer interjected, "Elijah Johnson isn't just any soldier. His connections go all the way to Washington, and he seems to have resources we didn't anticipate." Remington stopped pacing. "What kind of resources?" "The kind that can access bank records without warrants. The kind that can trace calls between your office and Judge Whitmore. The kind that—" "Enough," Remington cut him off. "Get me Whitmore. Now." But Judge Whitmore wasn't answering his phone. After leaving the courthouse, he had gone straight to his weekend cabin, packed a bag, and started driving toward the state line. 30 years on the bench. all the power and prestige he'd accumulated. And now it was crumbling because of one elderly woman who wouldn't sell her house and her son, who wouldn't look the other way. As Judge Whitmore crossed the county line, his phone rang again. This time he answered. "I can't talk, Charles. I'm leaving town for a while." "Running won't help," Remington replied coldly. "If I go down, you go down with me." "You don't understand," Whitmore said, his voice tight with stress. "Johnson knows. Everything. The land deals, the rigged court cases, all of it. He's got evidence we didn't even know existed. That's impossible. He's been in town less than a day." "He's not working alone," Whitmore insisted. "His team has been digging into our operations since last night. My clerk just called. They've subpoenaed all my records related to your developments." There was silence on the line for a moment. Then Remington asked, "Where are you going?" "Somewhere to think," Whitmore replied vaguely, suddenly wary. "Good idea," Remington said, his voice softening. "Lay low. This will blow over." As Whitmore ended the call, he didn't notice the dark sedan that had been following him since he left. The courthouse, or the man inside reporting his location to Elijah Johnson. Back at Martha's house, Emma Wilson had arrived, still shaking with nerves but determined to tell the truth. She sat in Martha's living room clutching a cup of tea between her hands. "I saw the whole thing," she confessed. "Mr. Preston took the necklace himself. He did it when everyone was distracted by James's speech about his artwork. Then he put it in his office safe. And then he claimed it was stolen." Martha nodded. "Did he tell you to lie?" "He said if I wanted to keep my scholarship and job, I needed to remember seeing you near the display case." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I was too scared to speak up. I'm so sorry, Miss Johnson." Martha reached out and took the young woman's hand. "You're speaking up now. That's what matters." Elijah, who had been listening quietly, asked, "Would you be willing to make a formal statement?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I can't be part of this anymore." As David began recording Emma's statement, Elijah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, who was monitoring Remington's movements. The message was simple. "He's on the move, heading to the gallery with security." Elijah turned to his mother. "Remington's making his play. He's going to recover the necklace himself, probably to destroy evidence of the setup." Martha's expression hardened. "Then we need to get there first." "No," Elijah said firmly. "I need you to stay here where it's safe. David will remain with you and Emma." He turned to David. "No one comes in." David nodded, his hand instinctively moving to the small of his back where Elijah knew he carried a concealed weapon. As Elijah headed for the door, Martha called after him, "Elijah, be careful. Remington is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous." "So am I, Mom," he replied with a slight smile. "So am I." The Westwood County Courthouse stood as a monument to justice, a grand limestone building with tall columns and wide steps leading to heavy oak doors. Today those steps were crowded with protesters, reporters, and curious onlookers, all drawn by the rapidly evolving story of Martha Johnson's arrest and the allegations of corruption surrounding it. Inside, Courtroom 3 hummed with anticipation. Every seat was filled, forcing latecomers to stand along the back wall. The room was a perfect cross-section of Westwood. Elderly residents who had known Martha for decades, young activists outraged by her treatment, reporters scribbling notes, and legal observers drawn by rumors of high-profile corruption about to be exposed. Martha sat at the defense table, spine straight, hands folded calmly in her lap. She wore a simple black dress with a strand of pearls, the picture of dignified composure. Beside her, David Wilson arranged documents with methodical precision while consulting quietly with 2 additional attorneys who had joined their team overnight. These weren't local lawyers, but heavy hitters from the state capitol, known for taking on powerful interests and winning. Elijah sat directly behind his mother, a silent guardian whose presence seemed to fill more space than his physical form should allow. His calm watchfulness made several people in the gallery nervous, particularly Officer Crow, who kept glancing toward the exit as if calculating escape routes. District Attorney William Price entered from a side door, looking distinctly uncomfortable. His usual swagger was absent as he settled at the prosecution table, avoiding eye contact with Martha or Elijah. The DA typically sent junior prosecutors for initial hearings, but the high-profile nature of this case, and pressure from above, had forced his personal involvement. "Something's wrong," Martha whispered to David. "Price looks like he'd rather be anywhere else." David nodded slightly. Marcus found some interesting connections between Price's campaign finances and Remington Enterprises. He's realizing he's on the wrong side of history. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Patricia Lawson presiding. Judge Lawson entered, a tall black woman in her 50s with a reputation for zero tolerance for legal games or courtroom theatrics. Her appointment to the bench 10 years ago had been celebrated by the community as a historic step forward. Now her presence in this particular case felt like fate. "Be seated," she said, settling into her chair and surveying the packed courtroom with sharp eyes. "Let's get something clear from the start. This courtroom is not a theater, it is not a political arena, and it is certainly not a place for settling personal vendettas. We are here for one purpose only: to determine whether there is sufficient evidence to proceed with charges against Martha Johnson." She turned her attention to the prosecution. "Mr. Price, I understand this case involves alleged theft of a valuable necklace from Westwood Gallery. Are you prepared to present your evidence?" Price stood, adjusting his tie nervously. "Your Honor, given recent developments, the state requests a brief continuance to review new information that has come to light." Judge Lawson's eyebrow rose slightly. "What new information, Mr. Price?" "Information regarding the circumstances surrounding the alleged theft and subsequent arrest. We need time to ensure we are proceeding appropriately." David was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, the defense opposes any continuance. My client, a 72-year-old woman with deep roots in this community and no criminal record, was publicly arrested and held overnight based on what we now know was fabricated evidence. The prosecution has had sufficient time to evaluate their case, and if they cannot proceed today, the charges should be dismissed." Judge Lawson considered both arguments, then nodded. "Motion for continuance denied. Mr. Price, call your first witness or dismiss your charges." Price hesitated, then reluctantly responded. "The state calls Victor Preston." The gallery owner approached the witness stand, looking considerably less confident than he had the night of Martha's arrest. After being sworn in, he perched on the edge of the seat, his eyes darting between Price, Martha, and occasionally Elijah. "Mr. Preston," Price began, "please tell the court about the events at your gallery 2 nights ago." Preston cleared his throat. "We were hosting a special exhibition featuring local artists. The Callaway diamond necklace was on display as part of a charity auction. During the event, I discovered the necklace was missing from its case." "And did you see who took it?" Preston glanced nervously toward Remington's lawyers sitting in the gallery. I believed I saw Mrs. Johnson near the display shortly before I noticed it was missing." "Objection," David called. "The witness is testifying to belief, not fact." "Sustained," Judge Lawson ruled. "Mr. Preston, please restrict your testimony to what you actually witnessed, not what you believe or assumed." Price continued, increasingly uncomfortable. "Did you personally witness Mrs. Johnson take the necklace?" "No," Preston admitted. "The security cameras were malfunctioning, and I didn't actually see anyone remove it from the case." "Yet you specifically identified Mrs. Johnson to responding officers, correct?" "Yes, but why her specifically?" Preston shifted in his seat. "I was advised that she might have been involved." The courtroom went completely silent. "Advised by whom, Mr. Preston?" Judge Lawson asked sharply. Preston's eyes darted to Remington, who sat stone-faced in the gallery. I'd rather not say." "Mr. Preston, you are under oath," the judge reminded him. Who advised you to identify Mrs. Johnson? After a tense moment, Preston whispered, Mr. Remington. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Lawson banged her gavel once, restoring order. And why would Mr. Remington advise you to accuse Mrs. Johnson specifically? David asked, taking over the questioning. Objection, Price called. Defense counsel is cross-examining during direct examination. Your Honor, David responded, it's clear the prosecution is struggling with their own witness. In the interest of efficiency, perhaps I should proceed with cross-examination now. Judge Lawson nodded. Given the circumstances, I'll allow it. Mr. Preston, please answer the question. Preston looked like a man watching his life crumble before his eyes. Mr. Remington wants to develop the Heritage District. Mrs. Johnson's house is the last property he needs, but she refuses to sell. He said if her reputation was damaged, she'd be forced to leave. More gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. And the necklace? David pressed. Was it actually stolen? Preston stared at his hands. No. Where is it now? In my office. Safe. Judge Lawson's expression hardened. Mr. Preston, are you admitting to filing a false police report and fabricating evidence that led to the wrongful arrest of Mrs. Johnson? Yes, Your Honor, Preston whispered. I was promised financial support for the gallery if I cooperated. I received a payment the night of the arrest. David placed a document before the judge. Your Honor, bank records showing a $50,000 wire transfer from a shell company owned by Remington Enterprises to Mr. Preston's personal account, processed 90 minutes after my client's arrest. As the evidence mounted, several members of the jury exchanged shocked glances. They had been selected that morning, 12 citizens of various ages and backgrounds, all watching as the prosecution's case disintegrated before their eyes. One juror in particular, an elderly black woman who had been taking detailed notes, fixed Charles Remington with a stare so piercing that the wealthy developer actually looked away first. During a brief recess, Martha sat quietly while her legal team huddled nearby, discussing strategy. Elijah remained at her side, a steadfast presence amidst the chaos. You were right, Martha said softly to her son. This was never about a necklace. It was about erasing history, Elijah replied. Your house isn't just property to Remington. It's an obstacle to his vision of what Westwood should be, and who should live in it, Martha added, a lifetime of wisdom in her eyes. When court resumed, the gallery was even more crowded than before, as word of Preston's testimony had spread throughout the courthouse. Judge Lawson had to call for order, twice before proceedings could continue. Your Honor, Price said, rising slowly. In light of Mr. Preston's testimony, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Martha Johnson. Motion granted, Judge Lawson replied without hesitation. Mrs. Johnson, you are free to go with the court's apologies for what you've endured. She turned to the DA. Mr. Price, I expect your office to immediately open an investigation into the false reporting and potential conspiracy charges against all involved parties. Yes, Your Honor, Price agreed, looking both relieved and apprehensive. Taking down Remington would be no small task, even with this evidence. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential civil rights violations. She fixed her gaze on Remington. This court will not tolerate the manipulation of our justice system for personal gain or the targeting of citizens based on their race or property. As Martha and her team prepared to leave, Emma Wilson was escorted in by Marcus. The young gallery assistant looked terrified but determined as she approached David. I'd like to give my statement now, she said. About what I really saw that night. David nodded, guiding her toward the clerk to be sworn in. Your Honor, we have an additional witness with relevant testimony. Judge Lawson considered this. While the criminal charges have been dismissed, I believe hearing this testimony may be valuable for the record. Proceed. Emma took the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. She described in detail how she had witnessed Preston, removing the necklace himself during a moment when the gallery was focused on James Turner's speech. He told me later it was a necessary business decision, and that if I valued my scholarship and future in the art world, I would support his. Story about Ms. Johnson, Emma testified. I was afraid to speak up, but I can't be part of this lie anymore. From his seat in the gallery, Remington watched with growing rage as his carefully constructed plan collapsed. He motioned to one of his lawyers, whispering urgently, but the damage was done. Several jurors were openly glaring at him now, and reporters were already rushing from the courtroom to file updates. As Emma finished her testimony, Judge Lawson addressed the courtroom. In light of today's revelations, this court will remain in session to hear motions regarding potential criminal actions by those who orchestrated this fraud. Mr. Preston will remain in custody pending charges of perjury, false reporting, and conspiracy. She turned to where Remington sat. Mr. Remington, while you are not currently charged, I strongly advise you not to leave the jurisdiction. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Remington understands he is to remain available to this court. Bailiff moved toward Remington, who stood abruptly. This is outrageous. You can't detain me. I've done nothing wrong. Sir, please be seated, Judge Lawson ordered firmly. Do you know who I am? Remington demanded, his composure finally cracking. I built this town. I fund your campaigns. I decide who succeeds here. The outburst silenced the courtroom. Judge Lawson's expression could have frozen fire. Mr. Remington, you are in contempt of court. Bailiff, take him into custody. As Remington was led away, protesting loudly, Martha turned to Elijah. It's not over, is it? No, Elijah replied quietly. But it's a good beginning. The morning after Preston's explosive testimony, Westwood awakened to headlines dominating local and even some national news outlets. Developers schemed to force black homeowner out backfires and decorated green. Beret exposes corruption in hometown. The story had everything: racism, corruption, a respected elder, a military hero, and the downfall of a powerful man who thought himself untouchable. For Martha Johnson, however, the victory felt incomplete. As she prepared breakfast in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had raised Elijah, where she and Robert had built their life together, she thought about the broader implications. There are others, she told Elijah, who sat reading through documents Marcus had prepared. Other families who sold their homes to Remington because they couldn't fight back the way we did. Elijah nodded, understanding his mother's concern. David is already looking into it. If there's a pattern of intimidation or fraud, those sales could be challenged. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. David entered, looking both pleased and concerned. Judge Whitmore has agreed to cooperate, he announced. After he was picked up trying to cross the state line, he spent a night in a cell, probably his first time experiencing his own system from that perspective. He's ready to tell everything about Remington's operations. That's good news, Martha said. There's more, David continued. The state attorney general is personally taking over the investigation, and the FBI has opened a file on Remington for potential civil rights violations, racketeering, and witness intimidation. And the bad news? Elijah asked, recognizing David's expression. Remington made bail this morning. His lawyers got him before a friendly judge, one of the few he still has influence with. And he's called an emergency board meeting at Remington Enterprises. We think he's trying to move assets or destroy evidence. Elijah stood, decision made. We need to meet with Whitmore now. An hour later, they sat in a conference room at the county jail. Judge Howard Whitmore, once one of the most powerful men in Westwood, now wore a standard-issue jumpsuit, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his confident demeanor replaced by nervous exhaustion. I never meant for it to go this far, he began, avoiding eye contact with Martha. It started small, favorable rulings on zoning issues, expedited permits. But Remington kept asking for more. When did it move from unethical to criminal? David asked, recording the conversation. 3 years ago. That's when he started targeting the Heritage District. The initial offers to homeowners were fair, even generous. But when some refused to sell, especially the older residents with deep ties to the neighborhood, Remington became obsessed. And, my mother's house? Elijah asked quietly. Whitmore finally looked at Martha. Your property is the cornerstone of his development plan. Without it, the entire project collapses. That's why he was willing to go to such extremes. Tell us about the others, Martha pressed. The people who sold because they were frightened or pressured. Whitmore sighed. There were citations for code violations that didn't exist. Loan applications mysteriously denied. One family had their water shut off for weeks despite paying their bills. Another found their property taxes suddenly reassessed at double the value. All orchestrated by Remington, with help from officials like me who looked the other way or actively participated. As Whitmore continued detailing the systematic corruption, Martha's expression grew increasingly troubled. The scale of Remington's operation was far greater than she had imagined. This isn't just about my house anymore, she said when Whitmore finished. This is about justice for everyone he's hurt. Elijah nodded, a plan already forming. Whitmore's testimony gives us leverage, but Remington still has resources and connections. We need to move quickly. Outside the jail, as they walked to their car, David received an urgent call from Marcus. You need to get to the courthouse now, Marcus reported. Remington's lawyers are filing for a gag order to prevent Whitmore's testimony from becoming public. They're also challenging the legality of Emma Wilson's statement. On what grounds? David demanded. They're claiming she was coerced by Elijah, that his military background and reputation intimidated her into changing her story. Martha shook her head in disbelief. That poor girl came forward on her own conscience. Remington's desperate, Elijah observed calmly. He's trying to control the narrative any way he can. When they arrived at the courthouse, they found Judge Lawson's courtroom packed once again. Remington sat with his legal team, now expanded, to include a crisis management specialist and 2 additional attorneys from a prestigious firm in the state capital. Judge Lawson entered, her expression severe as she surveyed the assembled parties. I understand there are several motions before the court today. Let's begin with the defense's motion for a gag order. Remington's lead attorney, Green Beret, rose. A tall man with silver hair and a custom suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Your Honor, given the sensitive nature of this case and the potential damage to my client's reputation from unsubstantiated allegations, we request a gag order preventing any party from discussing details of this matter publicly until all legal proceedings are concluded. David stood to oppose the motion. Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to hide the truth from the public. Judge Whitmore has provided sworn testimony implicating Mr. Remington in systematic corruption targeting black homeowners in the Heritage District. The public has a right to know. The arguments continued, with Barrett employing increasingly technical legal maneuvers to delay and obstruct. Throughout the proceedings, Remington appeared outwardly confident, occasionally leaning over to whisper to his attorneys. But Elijah, trained to notice the smallest details, saw the nervous tapping of his fingers and the thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. Midway through the hearing, a commotion at the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. Several FBI agents entered, led by a stern-faced woman in a dark suit who approached the bench and presented documents to Judge Lawson. After reviewing them, Judge Lawson addressed the court. In light of the federal investigation now underway, this court will defer certain matters to federal jurisdiction. However, Mr. Remington will remain under this court's supervision pending resolution of contempt charges. Barrett was immediately on his feet. Your Honor, we object to any federal involvement. This is a local matter. A local matter involving potential civil rights violations and organized corruption across multiple jurisdictions, the FBI agent interrupted. Mr. Remington, we have a warrant to search your offices and personal residence. Remington's face drained of color. "This is harassment. My senator will hear about this." "Your senator is currently being questioned about campaign contributions," the agent replied calmly. As the implications of federal involvement sank in, Beret requested a brief recess to confer with his client. Judge Lawson granted 30 minutes. During Gaitabinai, the recess, Martha, Elijah, and David huddled with the FBI lead agent, Special Agent Catherine Brooks. "We've been building a case against Remington for months," Brooks explained. "His pattern of targeting minority homeowners has raised red flags, but we lacked first-hand testimony until now. Judge Whitmore's cooperation changes everything." "What about the families who already lost their homes?" Martha asked, her primary concern still for her community. "That's where civil action comes in," Brooks replied. "With evidence of fraud and intimidation, those sales could be invalidated, but we'll need more witnesses willing to come forward." Martha straightened her shoulders. "I know those families. They'll talk to me." When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Several of Remington's attorneys looked distinctly uncomfortable, and Remington himself appeared uncharacteristically subdued. Beret addressed the court. "Your Honor, in light of recent developments, my client would like to propose a settlement." "What kind of settlement?" Judge Lawson asked skeptically. "Mr. Remington is prepared to withdraw all interest in Mrs. Johnson's property and establish a fund to address any legitimate grievances from other Heritage District residents. In exchange, he asks for consideration regarding the more serious allegations." David exchanged glances with Martha and Elijah before responding. "Your Honor, we appreciate Mr. Remington's apparent change of heart, but justice isn't something to be negotiated away. The people of this community deserve full accountability." Before Judge Lawson could respond, the courtroom doors burst open again. This time, a young officer entered, hurrying to the bench with a message for the judge. After reading it, Judge Lawson's expression hardened. "It appears there's been a development. Officers executing a search warrant at Remington Enterprises have discovered financial records indicating payments to multiple county officials, including 2 of my colleagues on the bench. Additionally, documents were apparently being shredded when agents arrived." Remington leapt to his feet. "Those records are privileged. This is an illegal search." "Sit down, Mr. Remington," Judge Lawson ordered sharply. The warrant was properly executed under federal authority. As Remington sank back into his chair, Martha noticed a figure slip quietly into the courtroom. Emma Wilson, clutching a small USB drive. The young woman approached David, whispering urgently. After a brief conversation, David addressed the court. "Your Honor, we have new evidence to present. Ms. Wilson has provided audio recordings of conversations between Mr. Remington and Mr. Preston planning Mrs. Johnson's arrest." Beret objected immediately. "Your Honor, any such recording would have been obtained illegally and is inadmissible." "Actually," Emma spoke up, finding her courage, "Mr. Preston records all meetings in his office for insurance purposes. It's disclosed in the small print of the gallery's visitor agreement. I manage the digital archives." Judge Lawson permitted the evidence to be submitted for review. As the recording played through the courtroom speakers, Remington's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "I don't care how you do it. Frame the old woman, destroy her reputation, make it impossible for her to stay in that house. I want that property, and I want the Heritage District cleared out by year's end." The courtroom fell completely silent as the recording continued, detailing the entire plan, from the fake theft to the coordinated media response to the pressure on Emma to lie. When it ended, Remington no longer looked like the powerful, untouchable figure who had dominated Westwood for decades. He looked, like what he truly was, a desperate man whose empire of corruption was crumbling around him. "In light of this evidence," Judge Lawson stated, "Mr. Remington is remanded to custody pending trial. Bail is revoked due to the clear evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice." As the bailiff approached Remington, Reality seemed to finally sink in. His carefully constructed world had collapsed in less than 3 days, all because of one elderly woman's refusal to be intimidated and her son's determination to stand beside her. "This isn't over," Remington hissed as he was led past Martha. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Martha simply watched him go, her expression serene. "I believe that was your mistake, Mr. Remington, not mine." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Martha, Elijah, and their legal team. But it was Emma Wilson who captured the media's attention when she stepped forward to make a statement. "I was afraid to tell the truth," she admitted, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "Afraid of losing my scholarship, my job, my future. But Ms. Johnson taught me in 3rd grade that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right despite your fear." As cameras flashed and questions flew, Martha stood tall beside the young woman who had found her courage. The Heritage District would remain, and its history would not be erased. The battle wasn't over. There would be more legal challenges, more resistance from those whose corruption had been exposed. But today, justice had prevailed, and Martha Johnson was going home. The Westwood County Courthouse had never seen a trial like this one. For 3 straight days, the building had been surrounded by protesters, supporters, and media vans with satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Inside, every seat was filled as citizens witnessed the unraveling of corruption that had governed their town for decades. Martha Johnson sat at the defense table, though she was no longer the accused. Instead, she had become the central witness in the state's case against Charles Remington. Beside her, Elijah maintained his vigilant presence, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Remington's increasingly agitated state at the prosecution table. District Attorney Price, now determined to redeem himself, had assembled a formidable case. Judge Whitmore had provided detailed testimony about years of judicial manipulation. Victor Preston had confessed to his role in the false theft. Officers Crow and Payne had turned state's evidence, hoping for leniency by revealing how they had been instructed to target Martha specifically. As the morning session began, the prosecution appeared to be wrapping up their case. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing bribes, audio recordings of Remington planning the frame-up, and testimony from multiple officials who had bent to his influence over the years. Wilson Barrett, however, was not ready to concede. As Remington's lead attorney, he had built a career defending powerful clients, and he wasn't about to let this one go without a fight. "Your Honor," Barrett addressed Judge Lawson, "the defense moves for a mistrial on the grounds of prejudicial media coverage. Mr. Remington cannot possibly receive a fair trial in this environment of public hysteria." Judge Lawson's expression remained neutral as she considered the motion. "Mr. Barrett, while I appreciate your concern, the jury has been sequestered precisely to avoid media influence. Motion denied." Barrett changed tactics. "Then we move to exclude the audio recordings provided by Ms. Wilson on the grounds that they may have been edited or manipulated. The FBI forensic team has authenticated those recordings," DA Price countered. "Their chain of custody is well documented, and Ms. Wilson has testified under oath regarding their origin." Judge Lawson again denied the motion, her patience visibly thinning. Barrett leaned toward Remington, whispering urgently. Remington's face darkened as he shook his head sharply, clearly disagreeing with whatever his attorney was suggesting. "Your Honor," Barrett tried once more. "Given the complexity of this case and the severe charges, we request a continuance to better prepare our defense." David rose from his seat. "Your Honor, if I may, this appears to be yet another delay tactic. The prosecution has presented its case in a straightforward manner, and the defense has had ample time to prepare." "I agree," Judge Lawson ruled. "Motion denied. Mr. Barrett, please proceed with your defense." Barrett hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "The defense calls Charles Remington to the stand." A murmur ran through the courtroom. This was an unexpected and risky move. Putting Remington on the stand would expose him to cross-examination by Price, who had grown increasingly effective as the trial progressed. Remington took the oath and settled into the witness chair, projecting confidence despite the circumstances. His tailored suit and perfect grooming stood in stark contrast to his current status as a defendant facing serious charges. "Mr. Remington," Beret began, "could you please explain to the court your relationship with the Heritage District Development Project?" "Of course," Remington replied smoothly. "Westwood Revitalization Initiative is a comprehensive urban renewal project designed to improve housing, create jobs, and stimulate economic growth in an underserved area. My company has invested millions in planning and preliminary work. And Mrs. Johnson's property? A key location, yes, but hardly the cornerstone it's been made out to be," Remington said dismissively. "We made her multiple generous offers, well, above market value. Her refusal to sell has delayed a project that would benefit the entire community." Beret led Remington through a carefully scripted testimony that portrayed him as a misunderstood businessman whose only crime was an overzealous approach to progress. He denied direct involvement in Martha's arrest, suggesting overeager employees might have misinterpreted his wishes. Throughout this performance, Martha watched quietly, her expression thoughtful rather than angry. Elijah's face remained impassive, though his eyes never left Remington. When Beret finished, D.A. Price approached for cross-examination. "Mr. Remington, you've portrayed yourself as a champion of progress and community improvement. Is that accurate?" "I believe my record speaks for itself," Remington replied confidently. Price nodded, then placed a document on the projector screen. "This is the original development plan for the Heritage District, is it not?" "It appears to be, yes. Could you please read the highlighted section on page 3? Remington hesitated, then read aloud. "Phase 2 involves complete demolition of existing structures to maximize property values and attract premium retail tenants." "Complete demolition," Price repeated. "Not renovation or preservation. You intended to erase every trace of the historic homes in the Heritage District, homes built by the first black professionals in Westwood." "Urban renewal requires difficult choices," Remington defended. "Difficult choices," Price echoed. "Like choosing to frame an elderly woman for theft when she wouldn't sell her home." "I never ordered any such thing." Price played a portion of the recording where Remington's voice clearly said, "Frame the old woman. Destroy her reputation." Then he displayed bank records showing payments to Preston, Whitmore, and others involved in the scheme. "Are you suggesting these payments were also made without your knowledge?" Price asked. Remington's composure began to crack. "Those recordings are taken out of context, and those payments were legitimate business expenses." "Business expenses for what service exactly?" "Consulting," Remington snapped. "Looking after my interests." "Your interests," Price repeated, which apparently included targeting Mrs. Johnson specifically. He displayed an email from Remington to his project manager. "The Johnson property is non-negotiable. Get it by any means necessary." As cross-examination continued, Remington's testimony unraveled further. His denials became less convincing, his explanations more convoluted. When Price confronted him with evidence that he had attempted to bribe a juror during the preliminary hearings, Remington finally lost his carefully maintained composure. "Do you have any idea what it takes to build something in this town?" he demanded, his voice rising. "The red tape, the committees, the endless delays. Nothing would ever get built if I followed every rule and regulation." "So you believe you're above the law?" Price asked quietly. "I believe I get things done." Remington shot back. "I've created more jobs and generated more tax revenue than anyone in Westwood's history. A few shortcuts are sometimes necessary for the greater good." "Shortcuts like falsely accusing Mrs. Johnson of theft?" Remington glared across the courtroom at Martha. She was offered fair compensation. Her stubbornness was holding up progress. For thousands of people, sometimes sacrifices must be made. A hush fell over the courtroom. In his anger, Remington had essentially admitted to orchestrating the frame-up, characterizing it as a necessary sacrifice for his vision of progress. Judge Lawson intervened. "Mr. Remington, I remind you that you are under oath." Beret quickly requested a recess, which Judge Lawson granted. As Remington was led back to the defense table, his face had paled with the realization of what he'd just revealed. During the recess, Beret huddled urgently with Remington in a conference room, their voices occasionally rising enough for the guard outside to hear fragments of heated argument. When they returned, Beret approached the bench. "Your Honor, at this time the defense would like to discuss the possibility of a plea arrangement." Judge Lawson raised an eyebrow. "That's a matter for the district attorney's office, Mr. Beret." "Actually, Your Honor," Price interjected, "the state is not interested in a plea deal at this time. Mr. Remington's testimony has made the strength of our case clear, and we believe justice is best served by allowing the jury to render their verdict." Beret looked stricken. "Your Honor, surely some consideration—" "The court will take a 1-hour recess," Judge Lawson announced, cutting off further argument. "When we return, the defense may present additional witnesses or rest their case." As the courtroom cleared, Martha turned to Elijah. "He's desperate now," she observed. "All his money and power can't hide the truth anymore." Elijah nodded. "Men like Remington always believe they're untouchable until the moment they fall." When court resumed, Beret announced that the defense would rest without calling additional witnesses, a clear indication that he saw no path to victory. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following morning. That evening, as Martha and Elijah sat on the porch of her home, neighbors stopped by with food, flowers, and words of support. The Heritage District had rallied around its eldest resident, with promises to help rebuild the community Remington had tried to destroy. "Your father would be proud," Martha told Elijah as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Not just of what you've done, but of how you've done it." Elijah smiled slightly. "Dad always said your quiet strength was more powerful than any weapon he ever carried." "And he was right," came a voice from the sidewalk. They looked up to see Emma Wilson approaching with a small group of young people, all former students of Martha's, who had come to show their support. As darkness fell over Westwood, the courthouse stood silent, awaiting the final act of justice that would begin with tomorrow's sunrise. Across town, in a secured hotel room where the jurors were sequestered, 12 citizens discussed what they had witnessed. Their deliberations would be brief. Morning light streamed through the stained glass windows of the Westwood County Courthouse, casting colorful patterns across the crowded gallery. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation as Judge Lawson took her place on the bench. Today would mark the end of Charles Remington's power over Westwood, not with the dramatic confrontation he might have imagined, but with the methodical application of law and truth that he had spent decades circumventing. Closing arguments were brief and powerful. The Price meticulously outlined the evidence of corruption, fraud, and abuse of power that had terrorized the Heritage District and targeted Martha Johnson. Beret, recognizing the futility of his position, focused on humanizing Remington, suggesting that his intentions for urban development had been fundamentally good, even if his methods had crossed ethical lines. By noon, the case was in the jury's hands. To everyone's surprise, they returned after just 90 minutes of deliberation. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Lawson asked as the foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent as the verdict was read. "On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of witness, tampering, guilty. On the count of obstruction of justice, guilty." The list continued, with guilty pronounced for each charge. Remington sat motionless, his empire crumbling with each word. Judge Lawson thanked the jury for their service, then turned to Remington. "Mr. Remington, you will be remanded to custody pending sentencing. Given the severity and number of convictions, you should prepare for a significant period of incarceration." She paused, then added, "Perhaps that time will give you opportunity to reflect on the true meaning of community and progress." As Remington was led away in handcuffs, reporters rushed from the courtroom to broadcast the verdict. Within minutes, the news was spreading throughout Westwood and beyond. The man who had ruled the town through money and intimidation had finally faced justice. Outside the courthouse, Martha addressed the gathered crowd, her dignity and composure providing a stark contrast to Remington's fall. "Today isn't about one man's punishment," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It's about affirming that justice belongs to everyone, not just those with wealth and power." The Heritage District was built by people who weren't allowed to live anywhere else in Westwood. They created a community of strength, pride, and history. That legacy deserves to be preserved, not erased. Beside her, Elijah watched with quiet pride. His mother had always been his true hero, long before he earned any medals or recognition for his military service. In the days that followed, the full extent of Remington's corruption became clear. Judge Whitmore and other officials faced their own legal consequences. Officers Crow and Payne were placed on administrative leave pending disciplinary hearings. Preston agreed to a plea deal that included community service and financial restitution. More importantly, families who had been forced from their homes in the Heritage District began to come forward. With Martha's encouragement and David's legal guidance, they formed a class action lawsuit against Remington Enterprises. The company's assets were frozen pending investigation, and a trust was established to potentially restore properties to their original owners. 2 weeks after the verdict, Martha hosted a community gathering in her backyard. Neighbors brought food and music, creating a celebration of resilience and solidarity. Emma Wilson and other former students helped organize games for the children, while elderly residents shared stories about the district's history. During a quiet moment, Martha found Elijah sitting on the porch steps, watching the celebration. "You'll be leaving soon," she said, not a question but a recognition of reality. Elijah nodded. "My team has a new assignment, but I'll come back more often now." Martha smiled. "You go where you're needed, son. You always have." "Speaking of which," Elijah said, handing her a letter, "this came for you today." Martha opened it to find a request from a neighboring county where an elderly man was facing similar pressure from developers. He had heard about Martha's case and was asking for her help. "Seems you're needed too," Elijah observed. Martha read the letter again, considering. At 72, she had never imagined becoming an activist. But then, she had never imagined being arrested for a crime she didn't commit either. "Perhaps I will speak with him," she decided. "Some battles are worth fighting even at my age." "Especially at your age," Elijah replied. "Your experience gives you wisdom they can't ignore." As afternoon turned to evening, neighbors lit lanterns in the yard, creating a warm glow that seemed to symbolize the Heritage District's renewed spirit. James Turner unveiled a painting he had created depicting the history of the neighborhood, from its founding by Black professionals to the recent victory against corporate greed. "This belongs to all of us," he announced, explaining that prints would be made available to every home in the district. "So we never forget what we almost lost, and what we fought to keep." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet, Martha sat on her porch swing gazing at the neighborhood she had called home for over 50 years. The streets were peaceful now, but she understood that the battle for justice was never truly finished. Across town, in a law office that had once represented Remington's interests, David was working with a team of attorneys to draft legislation that would protect historic neighborhoods from predatory development. They were calling it the Martha Johnson Heritage Protection Act. At the police station, Chief Henderson was implementing new training protocols to ensure his officers understood their duty to protect all citizens equally. The department would never again be used as a weapon against innocent people, not on his watch, and at the county jail, Charles Remington sat alone in his cell, finally understanding that some things couldn't be bought, bullied, or manipulated, like a community's determination to preserve its history and an elderly teacher's refusal to be intimidated. 3 days later, Elijah prepared to leave. His team was waiting, another mission calling them to service. But as he hugged his mother goodbye on that same porch where they had watched so many sunrises and sunsets together, he knew this mission had been among his most important. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said simply. Martha smiled, touching his face gently the way she had since he was a boy. "And I'm proud of you, Elijah. Not because you're a decorated soldier, but because you remember what you're fighting for." As Elijah drove away, Martha noticed Emma Wilson walking up the path carrying a folder. "Ms. Johnson," she called, "I've been thinking about what you said about documenting the district's history, and I have some ideas for an oral history project." Martha smiled and opened her door wider. "Come in, Emma. Let's get started." The Heritage District had weathered its storm. Martha Johnson had kept her home and her dignity. Charles Remington had faced justice. But most importantly, a community had rediscovered its voice and its power. As Martha and Emma sat at the kitchen table, planning the project that would preserve their neighborhood's stories for future generations, Martha thought about what Robert used to say. "Justice isn't something you find. It's something you make happen every day." She had lived by those words all her life. And now, at 72, she was just getting started. What would you risk to stand against a system designed to silence you? Martha Johnson risked everything, her reputation, her safety, her home, to preserve not just her own dignity, but the legacy of an entire community that powerful men wanted erased from history. Her story reminds us that justice isn't inevitable. It requires courage, strategy, and sometimes the willingness to stand alone until reinforcements arrive. It reminds us that our elders carry wisdom that no amount of money or power can diminish. If this story of resilience and justice moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge us to examine the systems we live within. Share with someone who needs to be reminded that one person's refusal to be intimidated can change an entire community's future. Comment below with your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed someone standing up against seemingly impossible odds? How? Did it change your perspective on what's possible when we refuse to back down? Until next time, remember that sometimes the quietest voice in the room can deliver the loudest message, especially when that voice has truth on its side.